The stars above Saran Prime had always been peaceful. For 10,000 years, no warship had entered this system with hostile intent. The Sarani people had built their entire civilization on one simple truth. They would harm no one, and no one would harm them. Their queen, Yana, had spent 400 years making sure of that. She had brokered peace treaties between species that had been killing each other for centuries. She had turned enemies into allies with nothing but words and wisdom. But words meant nothing to the Krath Empire. Kang Do-yun was eating breakfast when the alarm started. He was sitting in the mess hall of the Alliance garrison, a small building at the edge of the Sarani capital city. His friend Park Sumi sat across from him, complaining about the food like she always did. "This tastes like wet paper," she said, poking at her meal with a fork. "You say that every day," Do-yun replied, "because it's true every day." Then the sirens began to scream. Do-yun had been a soldier for 6 years, but he had never heard that particular alarm before. It was the invasion alarm, the one they tested once a year and hoped they would never need. "That's not a drill," Sumi said. Her face had gone pale. They ran outside and looked up at the sky. What Do-hyun saw there made his stomach drop. Ships. Hundreds of ships. They filled the sky like a swarm of black insects, blocking out the morning sun. Each one was massive, covered in spikes and weapons. The Krath war fleet had arrived. "That's impossible," someone whispered behind him. "The Krath are 3 systems away. How did they get here so fast?" No one had an answer. The next few hours were chaos. Do-yun's unit was ordered to defensive positions around the city center. There were only 200 humans on Saran Prime, part of a small peacekeeping force that the Galactic Alliance had stationed there as a gesture of goodwill. They were not meant to fight a war. They were meant to attend ceremonies and shake hands with diplomats. Now they were being asked to hold a line against the most brutal military force in the galaxy. Admiral Talos arrived with the Alliance defense fleet within hours. His ships were impressive. Long silver vessels crewed by the Velthari, a species of tall, 4-armed warriors who had never lost a war. Do-yun had always felt small around the Velthari. They stood over 2 meters tall and looked at humans the way a wolf might look at a rabbit. "We will hold them," Admiral Telos announced over the comms. His voice was deep and confident. The Krath have never faced the full might of the Alliance. But Do-yun noticed something that the Admiral did not say. He did not say they would win. He said they would hold. Those were very different things. The Krath bombardment began at noon. The sky turned red with fire. Great columns of smoke rose from the Sarani cities as bombs fell like rain. Do-yun crouched in a trench with his unit, listening to the thunder of explosions that never seemed to stop. Lieutenant Bayek, their commanding officer, tried to keep them calm. He was a good man, a veteran of 20 years who had never actually seen real combat. None of them had. "Stay low, stay focused," he said. "The fleet will handle the ships. We just need to hold the ground." But the fleet was not handling the ships. Through the smoke, Do-yun could see Alliance vessels burning, falling from the sky like dying stars. The Krath had brought 300 warships. The Alliance had brought 50. By evening, half the Alliance fleet was destroyed. The Krath dropships came next. They punched through the atmosphere like metal fists, landing in the fields outside the city. Each ship carried 100 Krath soldiers. The Krath were not like the Velthari. They were not tall or elegant. They were built like tanks, with thick gray skin and 4 powerful legs. Their arms ended in claws that could tear through metal. They did not fear death. They welcomed it. The first wave hit the Alliance defensive line at sunset. Do-yun fired his rifle until the barrel glowed hot. He saw Krath warriors fall, but more kept coming. They moved through the gunfire like it was nothing, their bodies absorbing shots that would have killed any human. Lieutenant Bayek was the first to die. A Krath soldier tore through their position and grabbed him before anyone could react. Do-yun heard his commanding officer scream, and then he heard nothing at all. "Fall back!" someone shouted. "Fall back to the second line!" They ran. Do-yun ran with them, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst. Around him, soldiers from a dozen different species were fleeing in every direction. He saw a Velthari warrior, one of the elite shock troops who were supposed to be fearless, drop his weapon and run like a frightened child. The second defensive line held for 2 hours. Then it broke. The third line held for 40 minutes. By midnight, there were no more lines. Admiral Telos gave the order that no one wanted to hear. Full evacuation. Every soldier was to reach the extraction zones immediately. The battle for Saran Prime was lost. Doyun was trying to reach the extraction point when the building next to him exploded. The blast threw him through the air like a toy. He hit the ground hard, and for a long moment he could not move. His ears rang, his vision blurred. When he finally managed to stand, he looked around for his unit. He found Sumi lying in the rubble, half buried under broken stone. "Sumi!" He ran to her and started digging. His hands bled against the sharp edges of the debris, but he did not stop. "Sumi, hold on!" She was not moving. He dug faster, throwing aside chunks of concrete that weighed more than he could safely lift. But no matter how much he moved, there was always more. The pile was too big. She was buried too deep. "Please," he whispered. "Please, please, please." His comm unit crackled. The retreat order screamed at him again. "All units evacuate immediately. This is not a drill. All units evacuate immediately." Do-hyun kept digging, and then he heard something else, a different signal, on an open channel. A voice, calm, dignified, and tired. The voice of Queen Yena. "This is the Queen of the Sarani. My guard has fallen. I am trapped in the throne room of the royal palace. I do not ask for rescue. I only ask that someone help me send one final message to my people before the end. If anyone can hear me, please respond." The channel went silent. No one answered. Do-hyun stopped digging. He looked down at the rubble where Sumi was buried. He looked up at the sky, where evacuation ships were rising into the darkness. He looked toward the palace, where smoke and fire painted the horizon red. His hands were shaking. Every part of his body was screaming at him to run, to survive, to get on one of those ships and never look back. He pressed the button on his comm unit. "Your Majesty," he said, "this is Sergeant Kang Do-hyun of the Alliance Peacekeeping Forces. I'm coming." Then he started walking toward the fire. The streets of the Sarani capital were dying. Buildings that had stood for 1,000 years were now nothing but broken stone and twisted metal. Fires burned everywhere, casting strange shadows that danced across the ruins. The air was thick with smoke, and the smell of things Do-hyun did not want to think about. He walked against the tide of fleeing soldiers. Everyone was moving away from the palace. Everyone was running toward the extraction zones. Everyone except him. A Velthari warrior nearly knocked him down as it pushed past. The alien was massive, covered in battle armor that still smoked from weapon fire. It grabbed Do-hyun's shoulder with one of its forearms and spun him around. "Human! The extraction point is the other way. Are you lost?" "No," Do-hyun said. "I know where I'm going." The Velthari looked at him with confusion. Its yellow eyes moved to the palace in the distance, where explosions still lit up the night. "The palace is death," it said. "The Krath have surrounded it. The Queen's guard is gone. There is nothing there but enemies." "I know. Then why do you go there?" Do-hyun did not have a good answer. He thought about Sumi, buried under the rubble. He thought about Lieutenant Bayek, killed so quickly that he probably never even knew what happened. He thought about all the promises he had made to himself when he first became a soldier. Promises about duty, about honor, about being someone worth being. "Because someone has to," he said. The Velthari stared at him for a long moment. Then it let go of his shoulder and stepped back. "You humans," it said quietly, "I have never understood you." It turned and ran toward the extraction point, leaving Do-hyun alone in the burning street. He kept walking. The journey to the palace should have taken 20 minutes on a normal day. But this was not a normal day. The main roads were blocked by destroyed vehicles and fallen buildings. Krath patrols moved through the city in groups of 10 or 20, killing anyone they found. Do-hyun learned quickly that he could not fight his way through. He had one rifle with limited ammunition. He had a knife on his belt. He had training, but his training was for peacekeeping, not war. If he tried to shoot his way to the palace, he would be dead within minutes. So he did not fight. He hid. He moved through the ruins like a shadow, staying low and staying quiet. When he heard Krath soldiers coming, he pressed himself into dark corners and held his breath until they passed. When he found himself in open ground, he waited and watched until he saw a safe path forward. It was slow. It was painful. His leg hurt from the explosion, and every step sent fire through his muscles. But he did not stop. 3 hours passed. 3 hours of crawling through rubble, hiding in shadows, and watching death walk past him again and again. He was crossing through what used to be a marketplace when he heard voices. Human voices. Do-yun froze and listened carefully. The voices were coming from a collapsed building nearby. He crept closer and found a small group of Alliance soldiers hiding in the basement. There were 5 of them, 3 humans, a Veltari, and a small creature from a species Do-hyun did not recognize. One of the humans saw him and raised a weapon. "Who's there?" "Easy," Do-hyun said, raising his hands. "I'm Alliance. Sergeant Kang Do-hyun, 4th Battalion." The soldier lowered his weapon. His face was covered in dust and blood. "4th Battalion? I thought you were all dead." "Maybe I am," Do-hyun said. "I haven't decided yet." "Where are you going?" "The extraction point is north of here." "I'm going to the palace." The soldiers looked at each other. The Velthari among them laughed bitterly. "The palace? Human?" "The palace is surrounded by 5,000 Krath warriors. The Queen's Royal Guard, 200 of the finest Serani fighters, are all dead. No one is getting in there." "I'm going to try," Do-hyun said. "Why?" "The Queen is already dead. She has to be." Do-hyun shook his head. "I heard her on the comms. She was alive 30 minutes ago. She asked for help." "And you answered?" The Velthari sounded amazed. "One human against 5,000 Krath?" Someone had to answer. The soldiers fell silent. The small alien, a creature with big dark eyes and thin arms, moved closer to Do-hyun and studied his face. "You are afraid," it said. Its voice was soft and musical. "I can see it in your eyes. Your body is shaking. You are in pain, but you are still going." "Yes," Do-hyun admitted. "I am afraid." "Then why?" Do-hyun thought about the question. He thought about all the speeches he had heard about duty and honor and sacrifice. He thought about the oaths he had sworn when he joined the Alliance. But none of those things felt like the real answer. "Because if I run," he said finally, "I have to live with being someone who ran. I have to wake up every day knowing that someone needed help and I did nothing. That's worse than dying." The small alien nodded slowly. "I think I understand humans a little better now." Do-hyun looked at the group. "You should get to the extraction point. Ships are still leaving." "We know," one of the humans said. "We were just resting, getting our courage back." "Don't wait too long." He turned and continued toward the palace. Behind him, he heard the Velthari say something in its own language. It sounded almost like a prayer. The palace was visible now, rising above the burning city like a mountain of white stone. It had been beautiful once. Now it was scarred with blast marks and fire. Parts of it had collapsed, but the main structure still stood, and somewhere inside, the Queen was waiting. The Krath had surrounded the palace completely. Do-hyun counted at least 30 soldiers guarding the main entrance alone. There were more on the sides, more in the gardens, more everywhere he looked. He could not go through the front, but every building has weak points. Every fortress has cracks. Do-hyun had spent 2 years studying the palace layout as part of his peacekeeping duties. He knew things that the Krath did not know. He knew about the old drainage tunnels that ran beneath the palace. They were built centuries ago, designed to carry rainwater away from the foundations. Most of them had been sealed, but one entrance remained open, a small metal grate hidden in a garden behind the eastern wall. If he could reach that grate, he could get inside. It took him another hour to circle around the palace. The Krath patrols were everywhere, and he had to stop and hide so many times that he lost count. Twice he came so close to being discovered that he could smell the Krath soldiers, a sharp metallic scent that made his stomach turn. But he made it. He found the grate, hidden behind a row of burned bushes. The metal was old and rusted. When he pulled on it, it came away in his hands. The tunnel was dark and narrow. Do-hyun had to crawl on his hands and knees, dragging his rifle behind him. The walls pressed in on all sides. Water dripped from above. Things moved in the darkness that he chose not to think about. But at the end of the tunnel, there was light. He emerged in a storage room deep inside the palace. The room was empty, silent. He could hear fighting somewhere above him, the sound of weapons fire and screaming. The queen's throne room was on the top floor. Between him and her were 5 floors of palace, an unknown number of enemies, and every logical reason in the universe to turn back. Do-yun checked his rifle. He still had ammunition. Not much, but enough. He started climbing. The inside of the palace was a graveyard. Do-yun found bodies everywhere he looked. Sarani guards who had died at their posts, their weapons still clutched in their hands. They had not run. They had not retreated. They had stood their ground until the very end. Do-hyun respected that. He hoped that when his time came, he would face it the same way. The first floor was empty of living enemies. The Krath had already swept through here and moved on. Do-yun moved quickly but carefully, checking every corner before he turned it. His footsteps echoed in the silent halls. The palace had been beautiful once. The walls were covered with paintings and carvings that told the history of the Sarani people. Gold and silver decorated the ceilings. Crystal chandeliers hung overhead, though most of them were now shattered and dark. 10,000 years of peace, Do-hyun thought, all of it destroyed in one night. He found a stairwell and began to climb. The sounds of battle grew louder with each floor. On the 3rd level, he heard Krath voices nearby and pressed himself against a wall, barely breathing. 2 Krath soldiers walked past the end of the hallway. They were talking in their harsh language, making sounds like rocks grinding together. One of them was dragging something behind it. A body, Do-hyun realized. A Sarani servant who had probably hidden during the attack and been found too late. He waited until they were gone, then kept moving. On the 4th floor, he ran into trouble. A Krath patrol turned a corner directly in front of him. There was no time to hide, no time to think. 4 soldiers saw him at the same moment he saw them. For a heartbeat, everyone froze. Then Do-hyun raised his rifle and fired. The first shot took the lead Krath in the throat, one of the few places where their thick skin was vulnerable. It fell backward, knocking into the soldier behind it. Do-hyun fired again and again, moving forward as he shot. A Krath claw swung at his head. He ducked, felt the wind of it pass above him, and jammed his rifle barrel into the creature's chest. The shot was muffled by its body, but effective. The Krath dropped. The last 2 soldiers rushed him together. Do-hyun did not have time to aim. He swung his rifle like a club, hitting one of them in the face. The other grabbed his arm with crushing force. Pain exploded through his shoulder as the Krath began to squeeze. Do-hyun dropped the rifle and reached for his knife with his free hand. The blade was small, not meant for fighting something like this. But he did not need to kill the Krath. He just needed to make it let go. He stabbed the knife into the Krath's eye. The creature screamed and released him. Do-hyun stumbled backward, grabbed his rifle from the floor, and shot it twice in the head. Then there was silence. Do-hyun stood in the hallway, surrounded by 4 dead Krath, breathing so hard that his vision was starting to blur. His shoulder burned where the Krath had grabbed him. When he looked down, he saw that his uniform was torn and blood was seeping through. He did not have time to treat the wound. Other Krath would have heard the fighting. They would be coming. He ran. The 5th floor was worse. There were more patrols here, more guards protecting something. Do-hyun realized that he was getting close to the throne room. The Krath knew the queen was still alive, and they wanted to capture her. That was why they had not simply bombed the palace into dust. They wanted the symbol of her defeat almost as much as they wanted the victory itself. Do-hyun could not go through the main halls anymore. There were too many enemies. So he found another way. The palace had service passages, narrow corridors behind the walls where servants moved without being seen. They were not on any official map, but Do-hyun had learned about them from a Sarani cleaner who had become his friend during his months on this world. The cleaner had shown him the hidden doors, the secret paths that connected every part of the palace. He found one of those doors now, a panel in the wall that looked like decoration but opened when he pressed the right spot. He slipped inside and found himself in a passage barely wide enough for his shoulders. The passages were dark and dusty, but they were empty. The Krath did not know about them. Do-hyun moved through the darkness, feeling his way along the walls, climbing narrow stairs that servants had used for generations. He emerged on the 6th floor, just 1 level below the throne room, and that was when he heard the queen's voice again. It came from his comm unit, another broadcast on the open channel. Her voice was weaker now, tired. "This is Queen Yana. The Krath are at the doors of my throne room. My last guards have fallen. I do not have much time. She paused and Do-hyun heard her take a shaking breath. To whoever answered me before, the human soldier who said he was coming, I do not know if you are still alive. I do not know if you can hear me, but if you can, I want you to know that your words meant more to me than you can imagine. In these final moments, knowing that someone tried is enough. Thank you. The broadcast ended. Do-hyun started running. He did not try to be quiet anymore. There was no time for stealth. He burst out of the service passage and sprinted down the main hallway, heading for the stairs to the 7th floor. His legs screamed in pain. His shoulder was bleeding badly. None of it mattered. A Krath soldier stepped into his path. Do-hyun shot it without slowing down, leaping over its falling body. Another soldier appeared. He shot that one too. A third, a fourth. His rifle clicked empty, and he dropped it, pulling out his knife. The 5th soldier was faster than the others. Its claw caught Do-hyun across the leg, tearing through his pants and the flesh beneath. He fell, rolled, and came up stabbing. The knife found the Krath's throat, and they collapsed together in a pile. Do-hyun pushed the dead body off him and tried to stand. His leg would not support his weight. He fell again, hitting the floor hard. The stairs were 10 meters away. Just 10 meters. He started crawling. His blood left a trail behind him on the white marble floor. His arms shook with exhaustion. His vision was getting dark around the edges. But he kept moving, pulling himself forward one hand at a time. When he reached the stairs, he grabbed the railing and pulled himself up. He climbed the stairs on his hands and knees, leaving bloody handprints on each step. At the top of the stairs, he found the doors to the throne room. They were massive, made of golden metal and covered with ancient writing. They were also closed. Beyond those doors, he could hear Krath voices. Many Krath voices. They were trying to break through. There was another way in, a small door on the side of the throne room, used by servants. Do-hyun dragged himself toward it, his leg trailing uselessly behind him. The door was unlocked. He pushed it open and fell through, landing face first on the floor of the throne room. For a moment, he just lay there, too tired to move. Then he heard a sound, the soft clicking of Sarani feet on stone. He looked up and saw Queen Yana standing above him. She was old, ancient by the standards of her people. Her body was covered in cracks where the hard shell of her skin had been damaged by age and injury. Her wings, which might have been beautiful once, were torn and useless. But her eyes were sharp and alive, filled with something that Do-hyun recognized. Hope. You came, she said. Her voice was quiet with wonder. You actually came. Do-hyun pushed himself up onto his knees. Blood dripped from his wounds onto the floor. He was shaking so badly he could barely hold himself upright. I said I would, he told her, and I'm not leaving. Outside the main doors, the Krath began to pound harder. The ancient metal groaned under the assault. They were coming. The throne room of Saran Prime was the most sacred place in the Sarani civilization. For 10,000 years, queens had ruled from this room. Treaties that ended wars had been signed on these floors. The history of an entire people was written in every stone, every carving, every piece of gold and crystal that decorated the walls. Now it was going to become a battlefield. Do-hyun pushed himself to his feet, using a pillar for support. His leg was bleeding badly, and every movement sent waves of pain through his body. But pain could wait. Pain was for later. Right now, he had work to do. Your Majesty, he said, I need you to move away from the doors. Queen Yenna looked at him with her ancient eyes. She was studying him, Do-hyun realized, examining him the way she might examine a puzzle she did not quite understand. You are hurt, she said. You are bleeding. You can barely stand. I know. There are hundreds of Krath outside those doors, perhaps thousands. I know. You are one human, one wounded, exhausted human. She paused. And yet you came anyway. Why? Do-hyun thought about the question. He had been asked the same thing so many times tonight. Each time he had given a different answer. Because someone had to. Because running was worse than dying. Because he wanted to be someone worth being. All of those things were true, but they were not the whole truth. My friend is dead, he said quietly. Or maybe she's alive. I don't know. I couldn't save her. I couldn't save anyone tonight. All I could do was dig through rubble while she was buried underneath it, and then leave her there when the orders came to retreat. His voice broke slightly, but he forced himself to continue. I couldn't save her, but maybe I can save you. And that has to mean something. It has to. The queen was silent for a long moment. Then she did something that Do-hyun did not expect. She bowed her head. In 400 years of life, Queen Yenna had bowed to no one. Not to emperors, not to conquerors, not to anyone. The Sarani did not bow. Their queens especially did not bow. It was simply not done. But she bowed to him. Sergeant Kang Do-yun, she said, her voice formal and grave. I place my life in your hands. Whatever happens in this room, whatever comes through those doors, I want you to know that you have already done more than anyone could ask. You have reminded me why my people chose peace, because somewhere in this universe, there are beings like you, beings who will sacrifice everything for strangers, for nothing but the simple belief that it is right. Do-yun did not know what to say, so he said the only thing he could. I'll try to keep you alive, Your Majesty, but I'm going to need your help. The queen nodded. Tell me what to do. They worked quickly. The throne room was large, but it had limited entrances. The main doors were the biggest threat. When they broke, the craft would pour through like water through a broken dam. The servant's door that Do-hyun had used was smaller and could be blocked. Do-hyun pushed heavy furniture against the servant's door, sealing it as best he could. Then he turned his attention to the main entrance. Do you have any weapons here? He asked. My guards had weapons, the queen said, before they fell. Do-hyun found the bodies of the queen's royal guards scattered around the throne room. They had made their last stand here, protecting their ruler until the very end. Their weapons were still with them, energy rifles similar to his own, plus short blades for close combat. He gathered everything he could find: 4 rifles, 6 blades, a handful of energy grenades. Not much against an army, but more than nothing. He gave one of the rifles to the queen. Do you know how to use this? I have not fired a weapon in 300 years, she said, but I remember. Good, stay behind the throne. If they get past me, shoot anything that comes close. The queen moved to her position. Do-hyun took his place in front of the main doors, arranging the furniture into a rough barricade. He positioned the rifles within easy reach, switching between them faster than reloading a single weapon. Then he waited. The pounding on the doors grew louder. The ancient metal began to bend inward. Do-hyun watched cracks appear in the golden surface, spreading like veins across the beautiful artwork. They are almost through, the queen said. I know. Are you afraid? Do-hyun smiled. It was a strange time to smile, but he could not help it. Your Majesty, I've been afraid since this started. I was afraid when the bombs fell. I was afraid when my unit died. I was afraid crawling through those tunnels and fighting through the hallways. Being afraid is all I know how to do right now. And yet you are still here. Yes, that is very human of you, she said. Before Do-hyun could respond, the doors exploded inward. The first wave of Krath came through like a flood. There were 20 of them, maybe more, charging into the throne room with their claws raised and their mouths open in howling battle cries. Do-hyun opened fire. His first shot took the lead Krath in the head. His second and third shots dropped the 2 behind it. He swept the rifle across the charging soldiers, not aiming carefully, but firing constantly, creating a wall of energy that they had to push through. 4 Krath fell, 6, 8. They reached his barricade. He dropped the empty rifle and grabbed another, firing point blank into the face of a soldier that had climbed over the furniture. It fell backward, dead, and 2 more took its place. Do-hyun shot them both. A claw reached over the barricade and grabbed his arm. He let himself be pulled forward, using the momentum to drive his knife into the Krath's throat. As it died, he twisted and fired the rifle one-handed, killing another soldier that had been coming up behind him. The first wave broke against his barricade like water against rock. The survivors retreated, leaving 15 bodies scattered across the throne room floor. Do-hyun was breathing hard. His wounded leg had started bleeding again, and his shoulder was screaming in pain, but he was still standing. That was 20, he said. How many more do you think there are? Too many, the queen replied. Far too many. The second wave came 2 minutes later. This time there were 30 soldiers, and they were more careful. They did not charge blindly. They used the bodies of their fallen comrades as shields. They spread out, trying to come at Do-hyun from multiple angles. He adapted. He moved along his barricade, never staying in one place, firing from different positions. He threw an energy grenade into the thickest group and watched them scatter. He picked them off one by one as they tried to recover. But there were too many. Some of them reached the barricade. Some of them got over it. Do-hyun fought them with his knife when his rifles ran empty. He fought them with his fist when his knife got stuck in a Krath skull. He fought them with broken pieces of furniture, with a golden candlestick from the throne, with anything he could grab. By the time the second wave retreated, 25 more Krath were dead. And Do-hyun had 2 new wounds, a gash across his ribs and a deep cut on his left arm. His blood mixed with the blood of his enemies on the marble floor. He fell back to the barricade, gasping for air. Behind him, he heard the queen moving. She came to his side and pressed something against his arm, a piece of cloth torn from her own ceremonial robe. "You are hurt," she said. "I noticed." He tried to laugh, but it came out as a cough. "How are you doing, Your Majesty?" "I am impressed." She tied the cloth tight around his wound, stopping the bleeding. "I have watched warriors from 100 species, the Velthari, who are bred for battle, the Neth, who feel no pain, the Karathi, who can regenerate lost limbs." She looked at him with something like wonder. "None of them have ever done what you are doing." "What am I doing?" "Refusing to die," she said simply. "Every logical part of this says you should be dead. Your body says you should be dead, and yet here you are, still fighting, still standing." Do-hyun smiled weakly. "That's humans for you. We're too stupid to know when we're beaten." Outside the broken doors, he could hear more Krath gathering. The third wave was coming. It would be bigger than the first 2 combined. He picked up another rifle and checked the charge. Half full. It would have to be enough. "Ready for round 3? He asked. The queen returned to her position behind the throne. She raised her own rifle with hands that did not shake. "Ready," she said. The third wave was 50 soldiers strong. Do-hyun had stopped counting the dead by now. Numbers did not matter anymore. All that mattered was the next shot, the next swing, the next moment he stayed alive. The world had narrowed to the space between him and the enemy. Everything else had faded away. The pain, the exhaustion, the fear. There was only the fight. They came at him like a gray tide, climbing over their own fallen comrades, howling their battle cries. Do-hyun met them at the barricade with fire and steel. His rifle burned hot in his hands. The bodies piled higher. The Krath pushed forward, stepping on their dead, reaching for him with their claws. He killed them and killed them and killed them, and still more came. A claw slashed across his chest, opening a wound that sprayed blood across the marble. He grabbed the arm attached to that claw and pulled, using the Krath's own momentum to throw it into 2 of its friends. Before they could recover, he put 3 shots into the pile. Another Krath got behind him. Its claws closed around his throat from behind, cutting off his air. Black spots appeared in his vision. He dropped his rifle, reached back, and drove his thumbs into the creature's eyes. It screamed and released him. He grabbed his knife from the floor and opened its throat. The third wave broke after 12 minutes of fighting. 32 more Krath lay dead around Do-hyun's position. He could not stand anymore. His legs had finally given out. He sat with his back against the throne, blood pooling beneath him, surrounded by weapons and bodies. Queen Yenna came to him again. Her hands moved over his wounds, tearing more strips from her robe to bind the worst of them. "You need to rest," she said. "Can't." His voice was barely a whisper. "They'll come again." "You are dying, Sergeant. You have lost too much blood. If you keep fighting, you will not survive." "Then I won't survive." He tried to smile, but his face would not cooperate. "But you will. That's the deal." The queen stopped her work and looked at him. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she reached out and touched his face, a gesture of intimacy that the Sarani almost never shared with outsiders. "In 400 years, she said softly, I have never met anyone like you." "We're not special," Do-hyun said. "Humans, I mean. We're not stronger than other species. We're not smarter. We don't have claws or armor or special powers. We just—" He paused, trying to find the words. "We just don't know how to quit. It's not bravery, it's stubbornness. We're too stubborn to lie down even when we should." "That is bravery," the queen said. Bravery is not the absence of fear. It is choosing to act despite fear, choosing to stand when everything tells you to fall. That is what you have done tonight. That is what you are still doing. The fourth wave came before Do-hyun could respond. This time there were 70 soldiers, and this time they brought something else. Do-hyun heard it before he saw it, a heavy thumping sound, like a giant's footsteps. Then the doorway darkened as something massive pushed through. A Krath war beast. It was 3 meters tall at the shoulder, with 6 legs and a head covered in armored plates. Its mouth was filled with teeth the size of Do-hyun's forearm. It was bred for one purpose, to break through defenses that nothing else could break. The beast roared, and the sound shook the walls of the throne room. Behind it, the Krath soldiers waited. They did not need to charge anymore. They would let the beast do their work for them. Do-hyun looked at the creature. He looked at his remaining weapons. He had half a rifle's worth of charge, 1 knife, and 2 energy grenades. It was not enough, not even close. He stood up anyway. His legs shook beneath him. His vision was blurring at the edges. He could feel his heart stuttering in his chest, struggling to pump blood that was no longer there. But he stood. The beast charged. Do-hyun waited until it was almost on top of him. Then he threw himself to the side, rolling across the bloody floor, and came up, throwing his last 2 grenades directly into the creature's open mouth. The explosion was enormous. The beast's head burst apart, spraying gore across the throne room. Its massive body crashed into the barricade and kept going, sliding across the floor until it hit the base of the throne. But the Krath soldiers were already moving. They poured through the opening while Do-hyun was still on the ground, their claws reaching for him. He grabbed a blade from a fallen enemy and started swinging. The next few minutes were not a battle. They were a slaughter. Do-hyun killed 3 soldiers before they brought him down. A 4th, a 5th. Then a claw caught him across the back, and he fell. They surrounded him, a dozen Krath looking down at the human who had killed so many of their brothers. One of them raised its claw for the killing blow. And then the queen fired. Her shot took the soldier's head off. Before the others could react, she fired again, and again. She was standing in front of her throne, the rifle blazing in her ancient hands, her eyes burning with fury. "You will not have him," she screamed. "He came here to save me. I will not let him die alone." The Krath turned toward her. Some of them charged. She shot them down. Others tried to flank her. She shot them too. Do-hyun used the distraction to crawl back to his feet. He grabbed a fallen rifle and added his fire to hers. Together, the wounded human and the ancient queen stood back to back in the middle of the throne room, surrounded by enemies, fighting for their lives. They should have died. By every measure of logic and reason, they should have died. But somehow, impossibly, they did not. The 4th wave retreated. Do-hyun collapsed against the queen, and she held him up. They were both covered in blood, their own and their enemies. The throne room was carpeted with bodies. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of death. "That was 82, the queen said quietly. 82 Krath warriors. You killed 82 of them." "We killed them," Do-hyun corrected. "That last part was all you. I killed 8. You killed the rest." Do-hyun tried to laugh, but all that came out was a wet cough. "I'm going to feel this tomorrow. If we see tomorrow." They heard movement outside. The 5th wave was forming, but this one was different. There were no battle cries, no howling soldiers. Instead, there was a single voice, deep, commanding, speaking in accented standard. "Human!" Do-hyun looked toward the broken doors. A figure stood there, silhouetted against the fires beyond. It was larger than the other Krath, covered in elaborate armor decorated with the skulls of fallen enemies. Warlord Malgus, the commander of the entire invasion. The conqueror who had never lost a siege. He stepped into the throne room, alone, and looked at the carnage around him. His eyes, cold, calculating, moved from the piled bodies to the wounded human, standing in the middle of it all. "One soldier," Malgus said. "One human soldier. You did all of this." Do-hyun raised his blade. It felt impossibly heavy in his hand. "Want to make it one more?" Malgus stared at him, and for the first time in his long career of conquest, the warlord looked uncertain. "What are you?" he asked. Do-hyun smiled with bloody teeth. "Human," he said. We don't know when to quit. Outside the palace, something rumbled. A sound like thunder, but different. Closer. Ships, not Krath ships. Alliance ships. The fleet had returned. Admiral Telos had been running away when the message found him. His fleet, what remained of it, was limping toward the nearest Alliance base, licking its wounds after the worst defeat in Velthari history. Half his ships were destroyed. The other half were barely functional. He had lost thousands of soldiers, watched his carefully planned defenses crumble like paper, and been forced to order a retreat that would stain his honor forever. The battle for Saran Prime was lost. The Queen was dead. There was nothing left to save, or so he thought. The message came from a civilian ship that had escaped the planet during the evacuation. A group of soldiers had been talking about what they saw before they fled, about a human who had answered the Queen's call for help, about a single soldier who had walked into the fire while everyone else ran away. Telos had dismissed it at first. Humans were not warriors. They were soft creatures, better suited for administration and diplomacy than combat. The idea of one human making any difference was laughable, but then more reports came. Intercepted Krath communications, full of confusion and anger. Something was happening at the palace. Something unexpected. The Krath were losing soldiers, not a few, but dozens, then hundreds, and at the center of it all was one human. Telos did not believe it. He could not believe it, but he had to see for himself. He turned his fleet around. The battle for the skies above Saran Prime had shifted while the Alliance was retreating. The Krath had spread their forces thin, focusing on ground operations instead of maintaining orbital supremacy. When Telos returned with his damaged but still dangerous fleet, he caught them off guard. The second battle was short and brutal. The Krath, overconfident from their earlier victory, were not prepared for a counterattack. Telos hammered them with everything he had, pushing through their lines toward the planet below. And now he was descending toward the palace, leading a force of his best remaining soldiers, refusing to believe the stories until he saw the truth with his own eyes. What he found changed everything. The palace was surrounded by Krath forces, thousands of them, milling around the building like ants around a disturbed nest. But they were not attacking. They were waiting. Afraid, Telos realized with shock. They were afraid to go inside. His dropship landed in the palace gardens. His soldiers formed up around him. 50 Velthari warriors, the finest troops in the galaxy. They fought their way through the Krath lines, pushing toward the palace entrance. The resistance was strangely weak. The Krath fought, but without conviction. They kept looking back at the palace, as if expecting something terrible to emerge from it at any moment. Telos reached the main entrance and stopped. The throne room doors were shattered. Beyond them, in the flickering light of dying fires, he could see shapes on the floor. Bodies, hundreds of bodies. Krath bodies, piled so thick that the marble floor was completely hidden. And in the middle of it all, standing on a mound of corpses, was a human. Sergeant Kang Do-hyun was barely recognizable as a person anymore. He was covered head to toe in blood, some of it his own, most of it not. His uniform hung in tatters. His skin was a map of wounds, cuts, and burns. He was swaying on his feet, held upright by nothing but pure stubbornness. In his hand was a Krath blade, the edge so worn from use that it was nearly flat. Behind him, sitting on her throne, as if nothing had happened, was Queen Yenna. Telos walked into the throne room. His boots squelched in the blood that covered the floor. His soldiers followed, their weapons raised, but there were no living enemies left to fight. He stopped in front of Do-hyun and looked at him. Really looked at him. The human met his gaze. His eyes were empty with exhaustion. But there was something else there too. Something that Telos had never seen in a human before. Something he had only ever seen in the eyes of the greatest Velthari warriors. The ones who had faced death so many times that they had become friends with it. "Sergeant," Telos said. His voice was quiet. "What happened here?" Do-hyun blinked slowly. It seemed to take him a long moment to understand the question. "They kept coming," he said. His voice was rough, barely above a whisper. "So I kept fighting." "How many?" "I lost count after 70. Telos looked around the throne room. His tactical mind automatically began calculating. Based on the bodies, the wounds, the positioning, this one human had killed at least 80 Krath warriors. possibly more, in a single night, while wounded, while protecting a non-combatant. It was impossible, and yet the evidence was lying at his feet. "You should have died," Telos said. "Probably," Do-hyun agreed. "Didn't feel like it." Behind them, more Alliance soldiers were entering the palace. They stopped when they saw the throne room, just like Telos had stopped. The silence spread through the ranks like a wave. A Velthari captain approached Telos. "Admiral, Warlord Malgus is requesting to speak with you. He wishes to discuss terms." "Terms?" Telos turned sharply. "The Krath do not negotiate. They do not surrender." "Apparently they do now, sir." The captain was staring at Do-hyun with something like awe. "Malgus says he will not sacrifice more of his soldiers against the human. He wants to know if there are more like him." Telos was quiet for a moment. Then, surprising himself, he laughed. "More like him?" He looked at Do-hyun, at this small, soft, unremarkable-looking creature who had done something that the mightiest warriors in the galaxy could not. "There are 8 billion more on their homeworld alone." The captain's face went pale. 8 billion? 8 billion humans who do not know when to quit, who do not understand that they are supposed to lose, who will walk into fire because someone needs help. Telos shook his head slowly. "We have been fools, all of us. We looked at humans and saw weakness. We saw soft bodies and short lives and no natural weapons. We never understood what they really are." "What are they, Admiral?" Telos looked at Do-hyun again. The human had finally lowered his blade. His eyes were starting to close. His body was shutting down, finally succumbing to wounds that should have killed him hours ago. "Unstoppable," Telos said quietly. "They are unstoppable. Not because they cannot be hurt, not because they cannot die, but because they will never ever stop trying, no matter the odds, no matter the cost, no matter what logic tells them they should do." He paused. "That is what humans are. And we were fools to ever underestimate them." Do-hyun's legs finally gave out. He collapsed, and Telos caught him before he hit the ground. "Medic!" the Admiral shouted. "I need a medic now!" Soldiers rushed forward. Medical equipment appeared. Hands reached for the wounded human, trying to save the life that had saved so many others. Through it all, Queen Yenna sat on her throne and watched. And for the first time in 400 years, she felt something she had forgotten existed. Hope. Because if the universe had humans in it, beings who would sacrifice everything for strangers, who would stand alone against armies, who would refuse to die simply because someone needed them, then maybe, just maybe, everything would be all right. Do-hyun's eyes fluttered open one last time. He looked up at Telos, at the soldiers surrounding him, at the queen on her throne. "Did we win?" he asked. "Yes," Telos said. "You won." Do-hyun smiled. It was a small, tired smile, but real. "Good," he whispered. "Then it was worth it." His eyes closed, and he did not move again. 3 months passed. Do-hyun woke up slowly, like rising from deep water. The first thing he noticed was the ceiling, white, clean, covered with soft lights that did not hurt his eyes. The second thing he noticed was that he was not dead. That surprised him more than anything. He was in a hospital bed, surrounded by machines that hummed and beeped in rhythms he did not understand. His body felt strange, heavy and light at the same time, wrapped in bandages and connected to tubes that disappeared into his arms. "You are awake." He turned his head and saw Queen Yenna sitting in a chair beside his bed. She looked different than he remembered, healthier, stronger, her cracked carapace repaired with gold that caught the light, but her eyes were the same, ancient and wise, filled with knowledge that spanned centuries. "Your Majesty," his voice came out as a croak. "What happened? How long?" "3 months," she said. "You have been unconscious for 3 months. The doctors were not sure you would ever wake up. Your wounds were extensive." Do-hyun tried to move and immediately regretted it. Pain flared through his entire body, reminding him of every cut, every burn, every moment of that terrible night. "Easy," the queen said. "Do not try to move yet. Your body has been through too much. The battle? The Krath? Won and defeated." A small smile crossed her face. "The Krath have retreated from Serani space. Warlord Malgus signed a surrender treaty with Admiral Telos. It was the first time in their history that the Krath have ever surrendered." Do-hyun closed his eyes. Relief washed through him, so strong it made him dizzy. Good, that's good. It is more than good. It is a miracle. The Queen leaned forward. Do you know what they are calling you? Throughout the galaxy, on 1,000 worlds, they are telling your story. The human who stood alone, the soldier who would not fall. They have given you a name, the last guardian of Saran Prime. Do-Yun laughed weakly. I was just doing my job. No, her voice was firm. You did far more than your job. Your job was to follow orders, and your orders were to retreat. You chose to stay. You chose to fight. You chose to sacrifice yourself for a stranger from another species, without any hope of survival or reward. She paused. That is not a job. That is something else entirely. She reached into her robe and pulled out something small and golden. A medal, Do-Hyun realized. But not just any medal. It was shaped like a Sarani flower, with petals made of pure gold and a center that glowed with soft light. This is the Star of Saran, the Queen said. It is the highest honor my people can give. In 10,000 years of history, it has been awarded only 12 times. You are the 13th recipient and the first non-Sarani to ever receive it. She placed the medal on his chest over his heart. But this is not the only honor you have received, she continued. Admiral Telos has awarded you the Velthari Cross of Valor. The Karathi have named you an honorary warrior poet. 11 other species have given you their highest military decorations. You are the most decorated soldier in the history of the Galactic Alliance. Do-Hyun stared at her. He did not know what to say. All of this seemed impossible, like a dream he would wake up from at any moment. I didn't do it for medals, he said finally. I know. The Queen smiled again, and this time there was warmth in it. That is why you deserve them. Over the following weeks, Do-Hyun recovered slowly. His body had been broken in more ways than the doctors could count. He had lost blood, lost muscle, lost parts of himself that would never fully return. But he was alive, and each day he grew a little stronger. The Queen visited him every day without fail. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, about philosophy and history, about what it meant to live in a universe full of danger and wonder. She told him about her life, about the centuries she had spent trying to build peace in a galaxy that seemed determined to destroy itself. He told her about Earth, about humanity, about the strange stubbornness that made his species who they were. I have met hundreds of species, she told him one evening. I have studied their cultures, their beliefs, their ways of seeing the universe. I thought I understood what made each of them unique. And humans confused me. She tilted her head thoughtfully. You are not the strongest species, not the fastest, not the smartest, not the most advanced. By every objective measure, you are average, unremarkable, and yet, she paused, searching for words, and yet you produce people like you, people who will walk into certain death because it is the right thing to do. I have seen this in no other species, this willingness to sacrifice everything for something as simple as hope. Do-Hyun thought about that. He thought about Sumi, still buried under rubble when he made his choice. He thought about Lieutenant Bayek, dead before he even understood what was happening. He thought about all the soldiers who had run while he walked toward the fire. It's not that we're braver than other species, he said slowly, or more noble. We're bad at math. Bad at math? We don't calculate odds the way other species do. When we see someone in trouble, we don't think about whether we can win or lose. We don't weigh our chances and make logical decisions. We just act. He shrugged, then winced at the pain the motion caused. It's stupid, really. It gets a lot of us killed. But sometimes it means we do impossible things. The Queen was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded. Perhaps that is why the galaxy needs you, she said. Not because you are strong, but because you remind the rest of us what courage truly looks like. 2 weeks later, Do-Hyun was well enough to leave the hospital. He stepped outside into the sunlight of Saran Prime, breathing air that smelled like flowers and new growth. The city was being rebuilt around him. Where there had been rubble and fire, there were now construction crews and growing buildings. Life was returning. He was standing there watching the work, when he heard a familiar voice behind him. "I heard you did something stupid." He turned and his heart stopped. Park Sumi was standing 3 meters away. She was thinner than he remembered, with new scars on her face and a metal brace on her left leg. But she was alive, alive and smiling at him with tears in her eyes. "Sumi," his voice broke. "I thought you were dead. I dug through the rubble. I couldn't find you. I know." She walked toward him slowly, limping on her damaged leg. "I was pulled out by some civilians after you left. Spent 2 months in a hospital ship before they could stabilize me." She stopped in front of him and looked up at his face. "I heard what you did. They told me you walked into that palace alone, that you killed almost 100 Krath soldiers protecting the queen." "Someone had to." "Yeah." She punched him in the shoulder, gently but firmly. "And it had to be you, didn't it? Couldn't just run away like a normal person." "Running seemed boring." She laughed, and the sound was the most beautiful thing Do-hyun had ever heard. "You're an idiot," she said. "A complete and total idiot." "I know. You're also the bravest person I've ever met." "I know that too." She hugged him then, wrapping her arms around him carefully, mindful of his wounds. He hugged her back and closed his eyes, feeling tears slide down his face. "You owe me dinner," she said into his chest, "for the rest of your life." "Deal." They stood like that for a long time. Two humans on a planet far from home, alive against all odds. Behind them, the galaxy kept turning. Wars would come again. Enemies would rise. The universe would continue to be dangerous and uncertain and full of darkness. But the story of what happened on Saran Prime would spread. It would become legend. And when the next impossible battle came, when the next enemy seemed unbeatable, species across 1,000 worlds would remember the human who stood alone. They would say, "Send the humans. They don't know when to quit." And they would be right. The end.